Are we sure Perfume Genius doesn't have a six-pack ab program? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to John Dudley Speaks. I'm your host, LifeLock. Iowa singer-songwriter Mike Hadreas, known professionally as Perfume Genius, started recording and producing his own music under the Perfume Genius banner as early as 2008 in MySpace, of all places. Growing up in an era of rampant homophobia as an openly gay man, Hadreas experienced first-hand unchecked rage and horrific treatment from homophobic, radically conservative classmates, and he never forgot it. Learning released in 2010, and it's a very special work from him. Ahead of its time in its indie lo-fi appeal, something that 2012's Put Your Back Into It built off of, entertaining queercore and its aesthetics, while fusing acoustic and gospel embellishments. But it was really too bright that catapulted Hadreas in 2014, featuring a sultry amalgamation of soulful pastiches, entrancing instrumentation, and a knack for catchy, syrupy, enveloping melodies. Live performances, covers, and benefit singles led up to the glorious release of the 2017 record No Shape, ambitiously expanding the Perfume Genius soundscape with arena-ready gems that retained heart and nuance. However, if we thought that was epic, we didn't really realize the treat that we were in for. 2020's Set My Heart on Fire Immediately was one of my personal favorite records of that year, and is one of the best records of the decade so far, as it's held up quite a bit 5 years later. Its eclectic variety of folky rhythms, danceable rock cuts, and experimental post-rock flair is extraordinary, forward-thinking as it shocks the senses, while connecting our hearts, souls, and minds to Hadreas' worldview. This magnificent approach would continue on Ugly Season, an accompaniment to Kate Wallach's The Sun Still Burns Here, and while it's great, it's not entirely the new breath of fresh air that we've been waiting for since Immediately hit. So that's why Glory, one of my most anticipated records this year, is such a bold delight, showcasing Hadreas in a new light that's unexpected. Produced by Blake Mills, who recently just collaborated with Japanese Breakfast on For Melancholy Brunettes and Sad Women. This is now 4 albums in a row that Mills and Perfume Genius have joined forces, and there's no sign of them getting into a familiar groove. Rather than leaning into the art rock or the chamber pop of their previous efforts, Mills emphasizes a folk and Americana heavy naturalism that's transcendent yet minimal. It's a Mirror is the best song I've heard this year so far. Its patient implementation of dynamics allowing for climbing crescendos, and Neil Young inspired rhythm passages that are captivating in their subtlety. No Front Teeth builds off that aesthetic, but taps into something bleaker and more ethereally gothic. The atmospheric swarm of percussion, soundtracking the crunchy folk rock guitar solo towards the back end quite intoxicatingly. The unconventional mix of Elton John-influenced obscure Baroque pop, and the peppy rockabilly heartland pop that ensues on Me and Angel and Clean Heart, is totally stunning in its versatility, especially when sat beside a central piece like Left for Tomorrow, which evokes the Postal Service and American football in its quiet, spare indie rock formula. I do think there are spots where Mills doesn't quite execute on the sound that he's going for, like on Full On, with its staccato strings not being complemented by the rhythmic arrangement, so it comes across as underdeveloped. And while I do enjoy Capizio, I didn't think it really needed the vocal phasing, as it awkwardly clashes with the other synthetic pieces of the instrumental. That being said, I do love the slippery slide guitar on that track, and while the mix on In a Row might be a tad overblown, it's epic, euphoric, and has that touch of gospel that some of the best Americana records indulge in. So overall, I was really blown away by Mills and Hadreas' establishment of musical singularity here, one that refuses paint by numbers folk for something far denser and more provocative. Born out of a depression that he had experienced during the pandemic, Mike Hadreas conceived of Glory while deep in the midst of self-reflection, and ultimately found comfort in the interrogation of his own feelings. It's a Mirror excellently takes on a critical tone in its search for identity amid isolation, with the lyric "My whole life is open just outside the door" personally connecting the most with me, highlighting the leap that needs to be taken in order to fully understand what's happening to you. And it's that vulnerability that he dives into on this album that's intentionally abstract, driving relatability through tracks like No Front Teeth, Clean Heart, and Left for Tomorrow, the latter of which tugs on very insightful views on the preparation and anticipation of hurt. The refrain on Full On is pretty stark as well, providing the perks of being a wallflower framing a masculinity through this quarterback lens that may be a bit too impressionistic for its own good, but it still works. Me and Angel is a stirring highlight as well, as it's an ode to Hadreas' partner and a general understanding and recognition that connection takes different forms over time, but that same love remains throughout every transformative season. I do feel like some of the structural pieces and arrangements of these tracks can wax and wane between plodding and directionless, like on Full On and Dion, but looking at it from a tonal perspective, Hadreas finds meaning in every movement of this record. So while I'm not on board with all of the flourishes here, I admire the skill and its elusive storytelling that's on display. By By and large, the most fantastic elements of every Perfume Genius record are the vocals and Mike Hadreas' presence on the mic, and Glory is yet another example of flawless execution. The gritty rawness of It's a Mirror is the perfect introduction to this album, sharply injecting a rise and fall component into his delivery that aptly mirrors the rise and fall instrumentation. Hadreas is wonderfully complemented by Aldous Harding's subdued vocals on No Front Teeth, and her presence is slightly predictive of the kind of album that we'll be getting from here on out, as Hadreas finds immense depth in the quieter moments. I love the rugged simplicity of Left for Tomorrow, which aches with so much openness and vulnerability that's mildly disquieting but fascinatingly sensitive. Clean Heart, Me and Angel, Dion, and Hanging Out also adopt a delivery that's introspective and reflective, never letting the instrumentals overshadow the vocals or vice versa, as Hadreas strikes an effective balance that's soothing yet anxiety-inducing. It's an affecting blend of histrionic embellishments that slide back and forth from fragile falsetto verses to commanding choruses, leaving us on a final note on the title track that breathtakingly doesn't try to over-amplify its themes or aesthetic, but instead rounds out this journey of self-exploration with a magnetism from Hadreas that's heavily minimalistic but never uninteresting. At 11 tracks and 41 minutes, Hadreas and Mills really work hard to eliminate any areas where they might overstay their welcome, and that results in a fairly tight-knit project that's among one of the swiftest listens in the Perfume Genius catalog. The 1-2 punch of It's a Mirror and No Front Teeth kicks this thing off with purpose, locking us in on Hadreas' worldview while propelling us into Crosby, Stills, and Nash adjacent instrumentation. But instead of narrowing his lens to fit this frame, the midsection of this record stays tender and reserved, not always hitting the right beats, but impressively cultivating an atmosphere that sticks with you as the listener. The track lengths land around the 3-minute mark for most of these songs, and although longer tracks like Full On might bite off more than they can chew, the pacing remains ultra-focused throughout knockouts like In a Row. So Hadreas and Mills excellently provide a layered album experience that's full of precision in light of its restraint. Glory isn't the best or my favorite Perfume Genius record, but it contains the best ingredients of what makes those records so powerful. And by adapting past sounds and motifs into a soundscape that's evocative of 80s Americana and indie folk, we have yet another winner in the Perfume Genius discography because of its distinctiveness. But hey, that's just my perspective. If you're a Perfume Genius fan, you're gonna love this record. And if you're in the market for a heartfelt exploration on identity with a plucky yet abstract instrumental backing, you're gonna want to check this out. Alright, that's all I got. Bye!